G'day everyone and welcome to Life in the Peloton. I'm Mitch Stocker and I've got another great episode coming for you this week. This is brought to you by Rapha, our title sponsor this year, making all these episodes happen. This week we're speaking with Colin Strickland, the king of gravel, the king of Red Hook. He is a legend in his own scene. He's actually a legendary name. If you haven't heard of that name, it's maybe because he came to the cycling scene a little bit different. He grew up on a farm in Texas, he got his degree in environmental science, and as a commuter around, he sort of got picked up after doing the Alleycat racing, which is fixed gear navigating racing. It's like the courier racing. You may have heard of it. We get into it in the podcast. But he got picked up there. He started doing Red Hook racing, which then led him to gravel racing. He's won all the Red Hooks. He's won Milan, Brooklyn, London, Barcelona, and then he went across to the gravel and he's dominated that. He's nicknamed the Gravel King because he's won Dirty Kansas, Unbound, and he took on the best there. Our own Lockie Morton and Alex Howes put them to the sword. He's a great guy, a really good chat, and he's also working with Rapha as well. He's got to experience what I got to experience, one in EF and now this year, and he's been able to develop some product with Rapha. Mate, so what's it been like working with Rapha? Actually, you've got to sort of help develop something a bit more than everyone out there gets to do with a company. They just get to see the finished product on the shelf. You actually got to put something on the shelf.
Yes, that is correct. We've been working on the new gravel-specific jersey from our friends at Rapha over the last year or so. It's been in development. And it's been really an amazing experience and kind of a dream come true, as Rapha was honestly one of the first companies that I sought out to purchase kit from, because at the time I was really adamant about, that wool content is an excellent aspect of a cycling kit for its antimicrobial and it's just general, being a general hippie in general. I was seeking the wool content in the kit, and Rapha was the one offering merino. So yeah, full circle, here we are, and I'm getting the opportunity to design not a merino kit because it's designed for full summer gravel racing, but a kit nonetheless with a lot of my personal quirks and influence. And it's been great that they've wanted to hear what I have to say and my input as a gravel racer who spends a lot of time racing in these things, and what aspects of it I could see improved from a traditional jersey, and whether it's storage or more sun protection in certain areas, or aerodynamic fabric versus ventilating fabric in different areas and areas of the kit. And yeah, I'm really proud of the outcome and really excited to be releasing that, I believe in a month or two.
There's a whole lot to get through in this episode. He's had a really different sort of cycling life and a view on cycling because he's been always in that world that I'm entering now. This great community around cycling, people doing it because they love it, and he's touching in at the racing scene. Sit back and enjoy this one, guys. I know you will. I certainly enjoyed sitting back and talking to Colin. Could have chatted to him all day. So, guys, without further ado, I bring you Colin Strickland. Here we are. We're sitting down with the known gravel king, Colin Strickland. Mate, welcome welcome to the podcast. Wish you could have got your reaction right then. Mate, welcome to the podcast, Life in the Peloton.
Thank you, Mitchell. It's so good to be here.
Because I want to talk a lot about gravel today because it's something that I'm getting into at the moment, and I know everyone out there listening knows or have heard about gravel, or they're going to gravel events or whatever it is. People are hearing that word a lot, so why not talk to the king of it about how to do gravel? But before that, something that I find really interesting about you, and a lot of people would find interesting about you, or maybe have not heard your name, because you're pretty late to cycling. You sort of made your name on the international scene with Red Hook crits. And my audience now is a little bit more attuned to Red Hook because a couple of weeks ago I had Alec Briggs on, who was sort of a Red Hook sort of star, I guess, as well, like you. Someone who came in, tried to shake up the scene as well, got involved in that scene. But before that, what I want to talk about is the way that you came to cycling, because you were riding, you were commuting, but I want you to tell me a little bit about sort of the path up to your first race, from what I understand, is about a 23-year-old was when you first sort of cut your teeth in racing, and what that first race was really like.
Yeah, let's see. I got into cycling as really just a kind of a functional transportation mode. It was during the heyday of like the fixie culture bloom in America. I'm sure it was elsewhere as well, maybe at the same time. But for us, it was about 2005 to 2010. We were all listening to the Strokes, wearing skinny jeans, and fixing up, Bianchi Pista Concept with orange wheels or something ridiculous, fixed gears, and riding them in traffic with no brakes. Somehow survived that. And near the end of my time at the University of Texas in Austin, where I grew up, my buddy with the local fixed gear shop was hosting a Alleycat race in association with the National Hand-Built Bicycle Show, which was
What's an Alleycat race?
An Alleycat race is there's no route. It's typically in an urban area, and there's just checkpoints, and it's kind of a map your own route. It's a bike messenger kind of format where you almost have to know the city. It pays to know the city, and it pays to be scrappy and dodgy as in traffic because it's open road racing. It doesn't have to be a fixed gear, but I decided to do it on my fixed gear because that's really the only bike I had at the time, honestly. And it was about, I think, 40-mile race with 6 checkpoints around Austin, and you have to get a little card stamped or something at each checkpoint, and and I won a bicycle frame.
Oh, you won it! You won the Alleycat.
I won the Alleycat, and there were a few Cat 1 road racers in it and stuff on road bikes, and there was also this man named David Trimble who was racing, and he approached me after the race, and David Trimble is the owner, founder, godfather of Red Hook. He said, "Colin, you need to come race this event I put on in my little home nook of New York called Red Hook in Brooklyn. It would be right up your alley." And so I think 6 months later, I went out there for my first one.
Wow.
And it was mind blowing, just like the scene that they were putting on in the show. It was just absolutely exhilarating. Right on the waterfront, overlooking the Statue of Liberty, just the coolest nook of Brooklyn imaginable. And I was hooked.
The thing is, like with Red Hook, and just to again explain it to the audience who are listening out there, Red Hook is a fixed gear criterium. It's on essentially a track bike is the best way to explain it. Where's the name Red Hook come from, actually?
So Red Hook is this little neighborhood, this little region of Brooklyn, New York. It's the southern kind of waterfront. It's really a dock community, a waterfront community of Brooklyn. Really, it's kind of the closest point on the mainland or Brooklyn to the Statue of Liberty. So it's where a lot of shipyards are located, and it's this really kind of off the beaten path little nook. It was really late to develop and gentrify, so it was always really dark and just quiet and warehouse district, and really a great place for parties and like to throw a bike race. When you look at New York in general, it's kind of over, just a busy place, but Red Hook was just this amazing little pocket.
So that first Red Hook you went to there in Brooklyn, was it? Or did you go to, what was it? Was that your first Red Hook race?
Correct, yes.
And how did you go in that first one?
I went okay. I wasn't very experienced racing, so I ended up 5th place. I believe there was a guy named Dan Chabanoff he's a buddy of mine now. I think this was that race. He's a good friend of mine now. He was a professional cyclocross racer for Richard Sachs.
Okay.
And he just rolled us like halfway through, rolled away, and I ended up 5th, which in hindsight I was pretty happy with, not knowing my head from my ass in the bike race.
Were you thinking at this point, like, what is this? What is this racing? Because was it quite underground then, or was it already actually up on that big platform, like you said, a lot of sponsors, crowd there, or was it still a bit the original scene of Red Hook, sort of just a lot of fixed gear, sort of messengers riding?
It was like right on the cusp. It was definitely mostly I mean, it was exclusively the kind of the fixed gear scene, but there were like the MASH guys from San Francisco. Chaz was there, Christensen, and a bunch of his teammates from, the heyday of MASH racing, and their, fixie videos were there. So it was definitely a coast to coast phenomenon. But I don't recall, there might've been one or two Europeans, but it was before Red Hook expanded to Europe. So it was only one event in Brooklyn at the time, 2012.
Right. So I guess fast forward then to 2015, when you went across to Europe and raced the Milan Red Hook. You won Milan, and then you followed up with Brooklyn, London, and Barcelona, sort of winning, the 4 Red Hooks. From that first Red Hook you did in 2012, right to there, what sort of hooked you there? Were you like, wow, I love racing. Like, this is something I really want to do, or I know it was just something you could do. What was the interest?
Well, 2012, the beginning of 2012 was, I think that's when I started racing road. So that period was really when I kind of dove into, the local domestic road racing scene, worked my way up to this. Ben Spies, the MotoGP racer, had a program that he had Eric Marcotte and Travis McCabe, some of the solid American road racers on, called Elbows Racing, named after his nickname, Ben Spies. So I eventually got on the Elbows Racing road race squad, and really kind of just cut my teeth in the trenches, the crits, the wet road races, all that nasty shit that you're so familiar with, that really like kicks your face in, that you really learn the craft, you learn the craft. And so then I reemerged after, I guess, 4 years in training of that, 4 years back to Red Hook, having kind of the background in fixed gear and still occasionally riding the bike. So having that skill set, but then blending that with the just racing savvy. At that point, I could say I was a pretty good bike racer, good at least knowing what to do and what not to do. And could just read the race better. And, I had the complete quiver at that point.
What was it like going out and doing those road racings with, like you said, Travis McCabe and these guys who are sort of, it's quite a cliquey sort of feel road racing, not super inviting sometimes. And when a new guy comes on, I can imagine you'd been super annoying because you would have been really strong, and you wouldn't have really known all the stupid etiquettes of road racing and what you can and can't do. You would have just sort of ignored that and raced against it, and, maybe push these guys more than they wanted to, and they would have to use all the tactics to beat you. Was that the sort of feel going out there, and was it hard group to get involved with, or was maybe opposite?
Like the American road?
Yeah, or like that road scene. It is, no matter where it is quite cliquey, and you've got to sort of grow up in it to sort of be, get that respect, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it definitely was. Man, my impression of it, at least in America, is just a bunch of like disgruntled young men fighting for scraps, is what I describe it as. No one seemed to be having any fun. It was like this bummer job that everyone was just like, had worked too hard to let go of. And it was like all they had. I mean, and that's certainly not entirely true, but people weren't having a lot of fun. There wasn't a lot of smiling at domestic road races in the mid, teens in the US. It just wasn't, I don't know. It just seemed desperate and angry.
Yeah, right.
That makes you tough, but yeah, I mean, that's
you're thinking to yourself, you're like, what? Hang on, why are we doing this again? Were we supposed to be having fun at some point?
No one's making any money. I mean, I don't know if they were. No one was making much money. Some people were making more than me. I made nothing. But yeah, it was just kind of like this esoteric pursuit of suffering, and like it wasn't even glory. It was like just kicking each other's face in was the glory. Like,
well, take me back. Take me back to Red Hooks, because explain Red Hooks a little bit for people out there listening. And, I've heard you say this, actually, Red Hook crit racing weirdly is safer than normal sort of criterium racing or even road racing. And that is a really hard thing to sort of fathom, because you're thinking, what's this guy even talking about? There's no brakes. There's no gears.
Yeah.
How is this actually safer? Run me through what it's actually like to race a Red Hook, and what sort of, like you said, we just pointed out about the road. What actually attracted you more to this style of racing?
Well, as with everything on like there's a cool trajectory, right?
Mm.
There's a sweet spot for everything. Road racing might be debatable because it's such a enduring, time honored tradition. It's a little different, but most like I'd say we could follow up with gravel racing in this same line, but there's like this sweet spot. Maybe it was just for me, but in the fixed gear criterium scene, there was I don't know, it got dicier and dicier as the firepower just got crazy, or maybe I just wasn't in the race. I was just off the front early because the fields weren't as deep and there wasn't as much firepower. But yeah, so a fixed gear criterium, the course is only about 2 kilometers long, I think, in general. And it's kind of intentionally designed to be really sinuous with hairpin turns and just some what you'd kind of think of as dangerous turns. But they, when you consider that your bicycle, everyone's kind of fighting to wrestle their own bicycle through the course. And that alone, it kind of creates this linear aspect similar to cyclocross where there's only 1 or 2 lines through every turn with any amount of speed. So it just becomes this kind of linear race instead of this mob that you often get in geared criteriums and road races, like just mad dash at a decisive turn and then everybody brakes at the last second. You don't get to brake at the last second. So if you carry too much speed, you will crash. It's not this like miraculous braking and then diving into the turn in front of somebody. You will crash. So you don't get to do that. So everybody has to be more civil. And I mean, and we're all pretty experienced at this level. So we all know the limits of the bike. So that creates this, it does create like a mutual respect because it's a mutual destruction.
That's the thing, yeah. That's the thing, like as you can imagine, and same with road racing too, and that's the thing that I did struggle with at the end of my career in the World Tour was there is this sort of understanding of what you can and can't do in a certain race. But as the new guys keep coming in, they keep testing it. They still are having to find out the new boundaries. But as the older guys are there, they're like, well, we know sort of what you can and can't do here, and there's a sort of flow in the race. Was that hard when you guys sort of kept coming into Red Hook and having to learn the flow of a Red Hook?
Yeah, it definitely was, especially when they're like accomplished, road racers and they're powerful. So they can put their bike where they want to, but can they get it out of it without, crashing you? That was always the diciness. And, near the end, like, I was actually just rewatching a video this morning. I hadn't seen it in a long time of like one of my last Barcelona races. I think I got crashed out with 1 lap to go from the front of the race. A Specialized rider who just took the hairpin turn way too hot, slammed into a wall and flipped their bike in front of me. And, and I lost the leader jersey, but when you play with, it's such a mayhem discipline that, eventually shit's going to go upside down, which is the fun of it, right? But
I want to talk about exactly what you just said then, the Specialized team, because you became sort of the powerhouse of Red Hooks. You mastered it, after a while. Like I said, you got those wins. You became the guy, sort of the quote of, how can we beat Colin? Like he goes early, or, he waits and then he takes these flies at 2 laps to go and we never see him again. So Specialized almost created this super team to sort of try and beat Colin, Tell me a little bit about that. And do you think that was sort of the end of Red Hook in terms of the way that the racing then changed? It sort of turned into this team thing and it stopped this free-flowing sort of race like you were speaking about. It became a bit negative in a way.
Yeah, I don't want to be too dismissive of any style of racing that doesn't suit me. But I would argue the same for gravel, that bike racing is kind of the most entertaining to watch. With road racing, I would say accepted because it is a team sport. Without teams, like Red Hook, just especially gravel, though, we can get into this again. But every rider trying to win the race is almost the simplest and most comprehensive, understandable format, and kind of the most fun to participate in and to watch. Where every rider, you form alliances and enemies during the event, and you form alliances, you break alliances, you form a group with people, all of a sudden you have mutual interest, and all of a sudden you might have missed the break, you're chasing as hard as you can, or you are in the break, you're riding as hard as you can. So, and then I mean, maybe a team of two is exciting to watch because there's a little bit of team structure, but no team is overpowering. But yeah, that becomes kind of a slippery slope of like, where do you draw the line? What's best for the sport, what's not. So, I mean, personally, I would always say no teams. It also creates this so in road racing, in the American road racing, I just felt this antagonism that was just like, we all look out for each other, but they're all assholes. Like, and it creates just this animosity of like us versus them, where it's like everybody is your buddy and everybody is your adversary. That's great. And that's kind of what we've had in gravel for the last few years. And that will change, of course.
Yeah.
That's kind of the fun part, is where like we're all trying to win, no doubt, but you don't have like these factions of like us v them that really kind of take the camaraderie out of it. Because if you don't have any teammates, you don't have any enemies.
It's just you just got teammates for the instant, and then the next thing you're trying to flick him because you're trying to win the race. Like you said, you need him to get across to the front. Once you're in the front, it's all game on again. Yeah.
But unfortunately, the sport is just catered, in road is you have teams of 8, it all makes sense. But usually in these like sub disciplines, there's teams of 8, there's teams of 2, there's a lot of teams of 1. So you don't have that equity of numbers and firepower. So then it just creates this weird, it's like gang fighting. I don't know. I don't want to go too deep.
Tell me about, would you like to go back and race Red Hook again? And now I want to talk a little bit about gravel just before we go there. I can see you shaking your head now. All right, because one thing I struggle to understand is Red Hook is just like a beast on its own, like 1 hour or whatever it is of power, anaerobic power. And then you've got gravel, which you're awesome at, and you're a race everyone's familiar with, Unbound or Dirty Kansas, which you won, which is a 9-hour race. These are two ends of the spectrum. I don't actually understand how you've sort of mastered both of them. So that's why the question is, would you like to go back to Red Hook?
The answer again, absolutely not. You could not pay me enough.
Why? You've just talked so fondly of it.
I've lost the skill. I was in it. I was living it. I was riding the bike. I was wearing my skinny jeans. I was listening to a lot of rock and roll. It was a moment. But it's a young man's game. I'm good. I'll watch it. I'll drink the beer and watch you young lads duke it out on these brakeless suicide bikes. It's too, there's a sweet spot. I hit it when you honestly, I'm good at bike riding, but I'm not the best. I hit things. I ride smart. I hit this, I hit the discipline when it's like winnable and just peaking, right? Like that's work smart, not hard. Like shit, I hit Red Hook and then it got really hard to win and I couldn't win it anymore. So I went over to gravel. Sure enough, won a bunch of those, and now they're really hard to win, and I might just go work on diesel trucks. Fuck, what am I going to do?
Let's talk about gravel then, because now, just before we get into it, let's just understand gravel here. How do you race a gravel race? What's the difference? What are the different tactics between, say, a gravel race and road racing? Because, that's the most similar thing I think you can compare it to. And we can get into some tech stuff too, the tires, the frames, the components, clothing. It all is slightly different. I love that there's just this sort of little niche that's popped up in between everywhere, and we've created a new little cycling discipline, more or less.
Yeah, so where do we start?
Yeah, well, I guess with the racing, first of all, when you go out in a gravel race, how do you see it different to, say, when people say, it's just essentially a road race on dirt roads? Well, is it?
Well, at the pro level in the US, so far, we haven't really had the arrival of, honestly, Lockheed and House are like the biggest pro team to be factored if they are racing as a team, which, assume they are. So it's really been an individual sport. Pete Stetna's dedicated. Ted King was the original kind of solo privateer, gravel racer, as we call them. And then I showed up, started doing my thing, and then Pete Stetna, and we're all kind of racing against each other, and no friends, no enemies. So that dynamic is different. Yeah, you're not. creates kind of a open book, an open plan. There's not a lot of team strategy going on. So, but again, it's changing, and there's no rule against teams. Some race directors are more frowning on it, like Rebecca Rush is staunchly anti-team. I think for all the same reasons that I am looking at. She doesn't, and it's really just, I mean, teams. It creates a chess game where the point of having teammates is to leverage numbers to be able to put yourself in a position to sit on and not work. And then later capitalize on that saved energy. That's the only reason. That's really it. I mean, get people in the move and then leverage that to not work and get up dig total on for, and
does that actually work in gravel? I guess that's sort of another point that I'm at, because I've done a few things, and although you can draft in gravel, it's not the same as drafting on the road. You can actually ride people out of the wheel to a degree on gravel easier than you can on the road, because there is skill involved. There is good lines.
Absolutely. And the response is it absolutely matters less, but if you're
still
skilled,
exists.
It still matters, and especially when you amplify it over maybe 10 hours of wind. But of course, it's not everything, and it's far less significant than road. But I digress. So that's where American gravel for now is mostly individuals. What else? What were the other topics? I'm a little fuzzy.
We're just talking the tactics too, and that sort of crosses over, but it also comes down there to, I think, also some tech stuff. It comes down to, with road, there is tech involved, but I feel like with gravel, it's more so important because you don't have the support cars there. You don't have the support of, guys on the side of the road with wheels or whatever else. So it comes down to also individual choice.
You really have to know your own tech. You have to be intimately familiar with. You'd be benefited to be intimately familiar with how your tires are set up, how to remedy a puncture, how to triage a puncture quickly, how to set your bike up such that I'm obsessive about kind of having everything ready for tire repair, because time is money and nobody's bringing you a wheel and drafting you back on. So, if you can avoid putting a plug in, great. If you have to put a plug in, do you need air? If you need air, is it going to hold, or should you have just put a tube? I mean, I don't even carry tubes anymore.
Right.
Yeah, a bunch of plugs, and worst case, a little patch with super glue to put on the inside, and then re-seal it. Yeah.
So you can do that if you, for instance, have a hole that's too big in your tire and it can't be plugged. You'll put a patch in and still seal it up without any tube.
Correct.
Wow. And you can get the patch on with all the sealant on the inside of the tire.
Well, I would clean it with a little alcohol swab.
So you got a little alcohol swab with you. Wow.
Yeah.
Is this being done in a race, or are you talking about just out on the road training now?
At that point in a race,
it's over.
Well, it depends. Late in the race, maybe you could hold on to a top 5, top 3, maybe a win. It's all depends, right? These are long. So that's the other aspect of gravel. These are typically very long races. So they're a war of attrition. So tactically, it's interesting that it kind of changes your gauge of like what a dangerous move is and what is not a dangerous move. And, power in numbers versus, smaller groups getting up the road. And, you have to kind of weigh in, like, do they have a chance? A group of 2 early in a 200-mile race? Probably not. Not. It's probably wise to maybe at least wait till halfway through the race to get anything moving.
Unless you're up the road.
Well, I don't know. It depends on the race. Depends on the day. So it's a little bit different. Things are moving in a little more in slow motion than on the road. You can until you hit a spicy section, then it's absolute mayhem. Dual rutted, early and unbound. They're changing the course, but traditionally mile 25, there was this dual rutted section of about 5 to 10K that was just so gnarly, and that's where it's just blown to pieces. People crashing everywhere, just mayhem.
Is it your tactic the same as, say, like I hit a cobblestone sector or an important sector, I hit the front. Sometimes you got to just push wind to be safe. Is that your tactic when you get to gravel?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Gravel, a lot of it's just like, just similar to a classic cobble race would be disaster mitigation. Just you're not winning the race anywhere, but you could lose the race in hundreds of different places, especially in gravel. I mean, you take a bad line and you end up just slamming into a rock, puncture, that's your day.
Well, seeing as we're talking about adventure and off-road racing and gravel grinding, whatever you want to call it, as you guys know, I use Restrap bags when I went on my Sweden adventure and also have continued to use them since then. More specifically, their adventure race range. Now, they actually reached out to me and said, "Hey Mitch, how did those bags go on Sweden? Was there anything you think we could do to improve it?" And look, there's a couple of things. You always find something that when you're riding with different gear, I wish that was just a bit longer, or that bit happened like that, or the zip was a bit like this. So you know what? I gave back a couple of bits of advice thinking, what are they going to listen to me? They went away and they spoke to all of their ambassadors, people who use their gear day in, day out. They took on that advice and they've released a new adventure race range. All the gear that you use when you want to go fast out adventuring. But actually, I still use that stuff every day anyway. It's great stuff. I'm talking about a saddle bag, I'm talking about a top tube bag, I'm talking about a frame bag, and also a bar bag. This stuff is spot on, and they've gone away and they've tweaked it even more. So go across and check them out. Restrap.com, that's restrap.com, and put in Peloton, PELO10, to get yourself a little discount as well. Guys, go check them out because I am thrilled. I was already thrilled, but now they've gone and re-released it again, so I know you're going to be thrilled when you go and see it. Now, let's get back to the episode. Let's talk about the scene actually, because this is something that I'm understanding now, and we spoke a little about the sort of the domestic road scene, and then I can also speak about the world tour sort of road scene. It's professional racing, and the thing that I've enjoyed the most about sort of stepping away from that world, not to say I didn't love it at its time, but the thing I got tired with it is the scene that I'm in now, these gravel events. It's an inclusive scene. It's an awesome scene. I'm loving meeting all these different people. There's a small race at the front, but I'd say majority of the people are just there to complete the event, have a hard day, do whatever they need to do. You get to the end and you could be having a beer with anyone. It could be the guy who was racing at the front, or it could be just someone who took twice as long. I'm loving that scene at the moment. It's such an inclusive scene. Tell me what you do or don't like about it, and about the ever sort of changing feel of it. We spoke about the world tour coming into some of these events. Is that affecting that scene, or what's your feel about that?
No, I think exactly what you described is what drew me to it originally. I went to a couple of local gravel races in Texas, and these were not super competitive ones. There were a couple of the same of us local cross racer, road racer guys who showed up and, again, had a little race at the front. But, it wasn't our race. And that's where I just kind of like, that's what clicked for me, and kind of the light went off of like, this is a fantastic. This formula is going to grow and explode because it's just a good experience. And not only for, the people winning the race or competing for the win, but it's just good for everybody. Has a quality, memorable, valuable experience. They get to race usually the same distance. Most people do the same distance as the pros, and they get that sense of accomplishment. They can even compare their time to the pros, and makes it more makes what the pros are doing that much more like approachable. And that's really what sold me on it, and how I was hired by Red Bull as a fixed gear racer, and I pivoted it into kind of like, hey, look at this gravel thing. This is pretty cool. And then, managed to kind of divert what I was to them, pivoted into being a gravel racer. Just as this scene was, sure enough, blowing up because people go to gravel races and they have good experiences. Like I was talking about my vibe at road races, some people are just really into that competitive. That's kind of what they thrive on, is that just kind of antagonism. But it's not a great business model, and it failed. I mean, I think it's fair to say it definitely never excelled in the US, and it pretty much failed, with the exception of a few races that are just good events. But just that, people are more likely to have a good time at a gravel race because it's just set up that way.
Yeah, it's just inclusive to all the different levels, like you said, you go to a road event, unless you're sort of in that top tier who's invested so much time in training and money to be, equipment-wise, to be at the very top. The rest are just sort of viewing it. But the fact that you can just pick up a gravel bike or have whatever level and be in the same event as you, I think that's quite a unique sort of feel. It is, I guess, that Grand Fondo sort of feel, but with a bit more spice involved.
Yeah. I ran into this guy, I think at Mid-South. I forget his name, but he was, so when I won the Unbound 2019 and I was crossing the finish line, I picked up my bike and there was this guy who was finishing his 100-miler and he like ducked under my arm and like did a little bike throw and like crossed the line right as I was crossing. And he's like, "Man, I'm so sorry. I ruined your finish line photo." And I was like, honestly, it's like, no, not really. Like, yeah. I was in your finish photo. It's not like, that's the whole point, is fair is fair, man. I mean, he paid his money. He doesn't have to like bow down to me because I put more time in on the bike. It's just not how it works. That's not real. That's kind of his invention.
Speaking of time on the bike, because it is getting a little bit more, I guess, serious, or maybe it's always been like that for you. I don't know. I guess kilometers wise, I sort of would put in about 30,000 K in a year to be a pro on the road. What sort of time and sort of mentality do you put into this? You've got a big sort of backing in terms of, sponsors. Like you said, you mentioned Red Bull, but also you've got your bike brand, Alliance. You've also his checks of Rapha, of course. There's people invested in you because they see this is an amazing scene, and you're really projecting in this scene that we're just talking about. How does that reflect then on the way you train? Are you still able to keep that feeling going, or are you feeling ever more, not pressured's not the right word, but this responsibility to train harder, to be fitter? What sort of Ks do you do? What's your feeling around training?
Well, it's no doubt. I've proven to myself the more I pedal my bike, the better I am at pedaling my bike in bike races. So, I've never really had a coach. I've honestly just ridden my bike. I ride hard when I feel like it, sprint up hills when I feel like I have some energy at the end of rides, maybe not if I don't. I've just been kind of just riding by feel, pretty laissez-faire, and it's worked, right? But there's no doubt there's a correlation between volume and success and fitness and good sensations. So yeah, there's been I had definitely had a significant disruption with the shutdown year, and I really took a hard reset. I kind of called it early on that I wasn't going to be racing anything that year, and sure enough, everything was canceled. So I kind of allowed myself to go down some rabbit holes of distraction. I started a business renovating travel trailers and off-road vehicles. And yeah, so there's no doubt there's a bit of a like water skis sensation. I have been struggling a bit with the volume, because no doubt it's a needy endeavor. And the more you put in, the more you get out. So yeah.
Do you feel that pressure like with the guys like you spoke about, Stettner, Lockie, Housey, whether it's those guys exactly, but this scene growing and your sort of legacy of who you are and what you've done already. Obviously, guys are coming in harder, and let's try and they put you up on the pedestal. Colin Strickland, we've got to take him out. So there's this sort of underlying sort of pressure, like, shit, I'm actually going to have to train harder. But then is it like, that's what I want to do? Or it's like, I don't know if this is really what I was doing here. Was I trying to make this into this sort of scene, where I'm out doing 30,000 K a year or whatever the hell it is?
Well, that's a great question. Remember what I said about working smart?
Yeah.
Maybe it's time to look for the other wave break on the
Yeah,
distance and
that's
paddle over
right.
to that one. Right? No, I mean it's healthy for the sport. I was thinking of making a decree that everybody needs to chill the hell out, and we're only allowed to train what 15K a year.
Yeah.
I don't know, something reasonable so we can have reasonable off bike
Exactly.
pursuits.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the way it is. That's not what the people want. The people want to see the fastest athletes I don't know. I'm a little torn right now, man. Honestly, I'm
Mm.
a little torn whether it's I'm cut out for it.
Yeah, because you get to, I've felt it myself. I've said to myself, I'm going to go to these events and just enjoy it. And your ego gets involved. You can't help it. You know, I'm trying to hang on longer than my body I've trained for. And ultimately, I put myself in this hole and I eventually get dropped. And people are like, yes, dropped in, Mitch Stocker. You know, you're like, of course. Like, I did 10 hours this week, you know, and that's sort
You
of my
trained more
limit.
than me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's bike racing. I mean, bike racing is a fitness test in almost all the disciplines.
Mm.
Little less so in mountain biking, slightly, but those guys are still fitter than me right now. I got smoked at Sea Otter Classic. That's what happened. Let's be honest. I ended up top 20 in the first. Like I was slated. I had a great start, and I was like positioned to just. There's a lot of climbing. I was ready to just motor, and I just didn't have the legs.
Was it just the legs or how are you technically on mountain biking?
I'm pretty okay unless something bad happens. Uh, I'm decent, and I should be able. I had plenty of room to motor, and I just wasn't. I think the other guys that I was racing in the Lifetime Grand Prix, I'm like pretty decent. Again,
Yeah.
not nowhere near the pure mountain bike pros, of course, but as far as all the other gravel racers, I'm on par. You know, I put my time in on the mountain bike, so. But yeah, man. So yeah, and that's where I'm just like, well, I need to do another 10 hours a week at least. I think last year I averaged 10 hours a week on the bike.
I'm liking that. And there's something really new for me. 10 hours a week before now was really a recovery week, considered a
Yeah.
week off. And now 10 hours a week, when you get a chance, you're squeezing in. You got to squeeze in a couple big rides there, you know,
Yeah.
3 hour ride, 4 hour ride.
And it's not adequate. I mean, I could not believe I got fifth at Unbound last year with 10 hours a week. I was so proud of that. Honestly, but it's not enough. And that's the question.
But what's your feel towards that? Do you want to commit more than 10 hours a week? Or is it going to be something that you're going to be pushing against your will? Like, oh, I've got to
Well, I
do it.
do. It's a good question. I do want to do it. You have to set your life up for it, though.
Yeah.
And recently, I've been setting my life up with a lot of distractions. I play music in a band. I purchased an automotive shop that I've been renovating, and I have more than 10 diesel engines stripped, like ready for install
Wow.
in trucks. It's insane. I have 9 Spartan trailers. I sold my first Spartan trailer this last January to John C. Riley from that LA Lakers show.
Wow.
He drove to Austin and bought my first unit. So I
Well,
have this.
wait. Tell me about the Spartan Trailers. I did want to talk about it, but now we're going there now. Tell us about that. This is something that you're a really handy guy. You're good with your hands. You love building cars, doing your own bike mechanics, and the Spartan Trailers. I've just seen a video about them. I was like, oh, I wouldn't mind one of those. Tell us about this little endeavor.
I just got obsessed with this particular type. It's similar to an Airstream, but a lot more livable, more squared off interior, more interior space. And I was thinking in 2018, like, wow, if I had one of these, I could get out of Austin, get out of Texas in the summer and really live the bike racer life. It would be heaven. I wouldn't be couch surfing. I could have my own home on the road. So great. Fast forward, I'm working on this thing. 2020 happens. Racing is shut down. The whole country is kind of on lockdown. So I just worked on my Spartan trailer and kind of started buying more and hoarding them and just starting to scheme like, wow, I think this could be a viable business. And, then 2021 came, racing's back on. I took it to Unbound. It was fantastic. I had like home HQ, service course, kitchen, my own bed. It was great. And then then I realized I had 9 of them. I would just obsessively, I would tow them home from every race I went to last year. Now I have 9 shells, 10, I don't know.
Have you got a big property? Where do you keep all this stuff?
I have a shop
Oh, right.
near Austin. I bought a shop on half an acre of land.
Right.
So
It's just packed full now of these trailers.
Yeah, and I just love I love the antique hunting. I love the interior design. I love the build out. I love the challenge of fitting all the utilities in. And then at the end, you have this beautiful living space,
Mm,
and it's really fulfilling. And it's also a viable business plan. And the original plan was to get to embrace cycling, and now I'm finding myself like pulled away from cycling by this kind of, it's in the development phases, so it needs a lot of attention right now.
mm. And
So that's where it,
that comes back to that ebb and flow, that pull between, wanting to be on the bike. It's something I'm experiencing now. I know I want to do a bit more, but then I also have said to myself, I want to be retired, So this, like, the whole time I'm fighting it. Like, whenever you get your ass kicked at a gravel race or something, I'm like, oh, I just got to commit more time and I'll be up
yeah.
there. But then I'm like, get back home and I'm like, I don't want to do any more than I'm doing. I'm sort of
Why?
happy doing a couple of hours and enjoying it. I don't want to get to that point where I'm heading out in a 5-hour ride, sort of getting back to what I was doing last year. Tell me about 2019. You were the winner of Dirty Cans, or what it was called back then. And, something special sort of happened. My old team, EF, reached out to you and sort of put on the table, hey, we might want you to come across and ride World Tour. To anyone sort of in your position, that's sort of, I can imagine, I could be wrong, sort of music to your ears. You're like, whoa, here I go. I get to go to the big leagues. But now after this conversation and knowing all this stuff, really, is that something that you wanted to do? And tell us a little bit about that story, how it didn't actually go forward. Is this true?
Yes, that is all accurate. Yeah, and I think it would have been a terrible fit for me. I think I would have been a terrible employee. I mean, I don't. I mean, there's no way I could have gotten my shit together in one season. And as it all turned out, I would have been signed on for 2020, the shutdown year with the compressed season. That would have been a nightmare.
Yeah, nightmare.
I mean, an absolute night. It would be hard enough with a 1-year contract and stressful enough, but that would have been. I probably wouldn't even gotten to race.
And that's the thing. I think a lot of people underestimate that. I'm not sort of trying to talk badly of the pro life, but it is viewed with sort of, what's the right word? Rainbow eyes, where you're looking rose glasses, it's just like, oh, that's just the dream. But at the end of the day, you have to be committed to, like any professional sport. It's your life.
And the younger you are, the more appealing or the more realistic it is. The more I think you're able to make the sacrifices. As you become an older man, older gentleman, it's less, it's harder to fit that in to your life goals, life plan. Yeah. So, I mean, it was an honor, but I think of course I made the right choice for me, and yeah.
Yeah. Is it something now that you look at, with Paris-Roubaix just happening this weekend, do you still look at it and think, wow, I would have loved to have, sort of had that chance?
I would have loved to have that chance maybe 8 years earlier when I was a lot hungrier. And then I just looked at the 10 or 12 crashes leading up to it. You got to you're just like charging this line of fire and you hope that you don't get hit.
Yeah.
Good luck. I mean, it's a beautiful thing if you end up in the final 10, group of 10, but
yeah,
I can only imagine how hard that is. How many things you have to dodge, how many claymores are.
I think just
you
the
tell
speed.
us, man. I don't know. I have no idea. You tell me.
Well, I think just the speed this year was underestimated when it, whether you're aware of what happened in the race or not, the race split in the very first sort of 50K. And just looking on TV, you think, oh yeah, these guys sort of, that's cool, it's split. But that is already 3 hours of intense racing before you even hit the first sector. And it gets completely underestimated. And when you watch the last 50K or whatever, when people tune in, or the last 100 at Arenberg, oh, cool, let's watch the race. So much has happened before that. Like you said, the crashes, the effort in the crosswinds. If you happen to be in that front, it's already almost like successful day if you're in the front group at the end of Arenberg. So
I cannot imagine. I mean, yeah, it was in the end, it was like a numbers game to me. And it's like, yeah, I could put all my money on, red 11, and that's 1 in 100 chances of having a good outing. But honestly, shit.
Yeah.
Good luck, sir. Good luck. I think I had for sure. I had a sure thing, or I had this like shoot the moon long shot of glory that could also just make myself look ridiculous and like, what a fool. He thought he could come in and like somebody told him that he'd be good at this and he just went to his head. Like, no, I know. I
Mm.
think I know this. I know this trick.
It's quite a sort of mature sort of outlook because you can get blinded by that. And I'm not saying that you wouldn't have gone well at all. I mean, that you wouldn't have not gone well at all. Like I think you would have been really good, but I think it just takes time. And just listening to what you speak and understanding you a little bit, you're more than just the bike. And ultimately, when you're a younger guy, that's all you sort of need is the bike. But as you grow older, these projects you've got on, these ideas, the time that you like to spend not training as well, which makes you a whole-rounded person, that's sort of, like, from what I understand, one of your best sort of assets. So let's talk about what's coming up, the Lifetime Grand Prix. And you did speak about the first event at the Sea Otter, the mountain bike. Tell me about what do you think about this six rider invitational series. I don't know too much about it. So not six riders, six event, 60 riders invitational. Is this exciting you this season? Because it's more or less all the races you've done. You never done Leadville, have you? Or have you?
I have not done that. I've always shied away from these just extremely high altitude. I don't live in the mountains. A lot of these guys just live there and, aren't as hungry. So it's hard to race Alex and Lachlan up mountains. They do it. That's what they do every day. And I live on the flatlands, so I do well in the wind. I'll race them in the wind. I'll race those guys in the wind any day, but tables turn. So yeah, I've never done Leadville. That's one I haven't done. And I haven't done the Chickamauga mountain bike race either.
You sound like a great sort of fit for me. That's exactly my comment. It's like, bring the wind on, baby. Let's play. Once it starts to get to the crosswinds, I'm like, finally. I'm not saying I love that stuff, but at least I feel comfortable in it.
Yeah, that's where you're from, though. We're all good at what we do, right? You grew up in the winds. Me too. Yeah, so no surprise.
Lastly, tell me a little bit about the teams that you're setting up around yourself. I'm actually holding an Intelligentsia mug right here. I love this coffee, and Doug Zeal, I actually didn't know that he was the founder of Intelligentsia. When I went across to the US, would have been 10 years ago, I sourced them out. I was like, I've got to get there. This was the famous sort of pioneer of this sort of third wave of coffee, specialty coffee that Melbourne is a real coffee sort of place. But we were sort of following in the footsteps of, the US who kicked it off, and more specifically Intelligentsia. Tell me a little bit about Doug Zeal and how you guys sort of got together and what you're doing and the history there.
Oh, that's so cool. He literally texted me 3 minutes before we got on this call. I hadn't spoken with him in a few weeks, and he just texted me. He's just like one of the most inspirational, friends of mine. In terms of just like, I didn't even know. I'm not super familiar with coffee world, and then I just hear this from that like mention of his like legend from you and from other coffee people. I just know him as like one of my good buddies who's just incredibly savvy serial entrepreneur and just compelled by design and art and cycling and merging all of these like aspects of culture together in ways not even to enrich himself, because a lot of his projects are like, they're just compulsive. It's just like he's drawn to just create cool concepts and do them, Yeah. And most of them work out, lucky for him. But he's just like compelled to do cool shit. And he's inspirational in that sense. I've met him. He was sponsoring Daniel Holloway in 2016 when I was on Specialized LA. So I approached him about it. I was really focusing on Red Hook in 2017 when I started my own program, and he was interested. He's like, sure, Red Hook. He was, he saw things the way I did. He's like, Red Hook, for a 1 or 2 person team, that's a great investment. You guys would get a lot of visibility, and it's a cutting edge, like hip, it's a hot spot. It's a good place to put your brand. So he was Intelligentsia was the title sponsor 2017, and then we kind of transitioned to the Meteor when he opened his own personal kind of cafe, coffee shop, bike shop, fusion uh,
Where's
business.
that? In Texas?
It's in Texas and in Bentonville, Arkansas, and also Austin and Bentonville for now.
Yep.
But anyway, when Doug moved to Austin, he actually lived in my master bedroom for a year. Just goes to as he built like his really nice house. It just goes to show he's like salt of the earth, just like really easygoing, you know. Yeah, I cannot speak highly enough of him in terms of his passion for the sport of cycling and just cool, like the good parts of life. Genuinely, just good human.
And what was it like for you then, sort of, I guess, setting up this sort of squad? Something I spoke to Alec about. There's sort of management of, people, sort of logistics sort of management as well. Is this something that you always envisioned you'd like to do, having your own little squad, or it just sort of happened and you just sort of had to step up to the plate?
It was kind of a process. Also, just observing why and how domestic road racing was failing. It was these structures were road required these structures that were unsustainable in terms of the support structures. You need mechanics. You need a team car. You need 3 bikes per rider. Just ridiculous like requirements. Like why? Well, I don't know. This is how you have to have a time trial bike. Like, why do you have to? I don't know. They do that in Europe. I don't know. So just looking at ways of like, okay, so why do these teams fold so predictably? Well, because they can't, it's charity and then the funding runs out and then they evaporate, because there's too many cooks in the kitchen, too many people on the payroll. And so I was like, well, the only way to make this really sustainable for me is to run a really lean operation. So at first I had 2 teammates I was taking to the Red Hook races, and then eventually just had 1 female teammate, and then to have some kind of parity in the men's and women's races, and then eventually just like, well, I just need to managing people is its own challenge, and it's hard. So I just ultimately was just like, you know what, I like wrenching on bikes, so I'm just going to run a program of just me and, and make it sustainable and, see if that works for sponsors. And it's worked out thus far.
And when it comes to sponsors, like this world that you're in now, it is something that I'm understanding too, is working with my own individual sponsors. As a pro, you underestimate how much is done when you just roll under that umbrella. Cool. Like we're all there, you're part of this squad, and you could just appeal to the team, and the team pushes out all those sponsors. But when you're dealing with individual sponsors too, it's managing that too. Because at the end of the day, it's a beautiful scene that you're in to promote this, and we're sort of just on the promoting side of it. How's it been working with this and understanding this role that you have?
Yeah, that's a whole nother time. I mean, time suck and time obligation really is managing it's mostly in the off season and getting your kind of contracts, partnerships kind of worked out and getting these agreements drafted. But yeah, you are the team. You are the publicist. You are the marketing, social media. You are, which is good and bad. It's good that you can be completely, kind of honest and, kind of like unprocessed. It hasn't been kind of unfiltered, if you will. Some sponsors like that, some don't. But when it comes to, the messaging and forming these relationships, many of these partners like Envy, I just approached in 2017 and I just picked the companies that I really believed were like my favorite gear.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, a company like Envy, they just started by just giving me rim sets, and I built them up to Phil Wood rims and was beyond stoked because these wheels are so nice. And, and then that evolved into actual support, financial support for the program. And yeah, so like, and the way I see it, the longer your tenure is with a given sponsor, the more powerful the messaging is. So yeah, I've really tried to stick to that ethos of just don't jumble up sponsors. Don't chase, the dollar every year to try to get an extra $5,000
Yeah.
from another shoe sponsor, to build a bigger war chest. It's like longevity is key.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Lastly, mate, what have you learnt in these last 10 years, more or less, once you sort of stepped away from, environmental conservation or environmental studies or what you were doing there and suddenly stepped into this world of bikes? There's a lot there because it's happened fast, in my sort of opinion. You've sort of lived 3 sort of careers there. What have you sort of step away and you can learn from all this?
That's a great question, Mitch. That's a really great question. Really, I guess if I had to encapsulate or condense it to one thing, it would just be the people you meet, and just kind of the impression you leave with people is like every single one, not conducting yourself with absolute decency all the time. It could very well come back at you, and it's just not worth it. It is so important just to be it's like obvious, right? Be a good role model, but the eyes are on you when you're a professional athlete. It's so important. You never know where opportunity will come in the future. So yeah, just be excited, be grateful for what we get to do, and don't take yourself too seriously. That's so important. Do not take yourself too seriously, because we're all going to be on the 10-hour-a-week plan one day.
I do love that, because it is advice for all walks of life, not just cycling, but more so important, like you said, because you are in the spotlight more than just, the normal Joe Blow. But I think it's great advice that anyone can take on board for anything, So, mate, it's been great having you on the pod today. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you and the people about my passion for bicycles, man. I appreciate it so much.
Well, I hope we can cross paths. I'm looking forward to following your wheel in the crosswinds and maybe trying to put you in the gutter a little bit, seeing, letting you taste it a little bit.
Oh boy, I can't wait for that. All right, I'll put it to 12 hours a week.
Well, there you go. What did you think? Colin Strickland, or Stricko as I like to call him. He is a great guy, a really great guy, and you can see he has a completely different view on cycling than most professionals, and it works. It's really worked in his scene. We didn't barely scratch the surface because he has a whole lot of other interests that we touched on. He's mechanicking his own bikes, he's building cars, as you said, and he's also building these trailers. He really is a great guy. I did enjoy that episode with him. I want to say thanks to Rapha for making these episodes come alive this year. Of course, Lara behind the scenes, and Will Jones for putting these episodes together. Next week, of course, I'll have a talking luft with Colin Strickland. So guys, until then, cheers. The music in this episode was composed by Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.